It has haunted the human imagination for millennia, a whisper of a lost world swallowed by the sea, leaving only questions and a powerful legend, the story of Atlantis. But where does this incredible tale come from? Is it history, a myth, or something in between? To find the answer, we must journey back over 2,000 years to ancient Greece. Our primary source, in fact, our only original source, is the philosopher Plato. He lived in the 4th century BC, and his writings are the genesis of the entire legend. Plato introduced the story in 2 of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. He claims the story was passed down from the great Athenian statesman Solon. Solon, in turn, was said to have heard the tale from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais. They spoke of a history stretching back thousands of years far beyond Greece's own memory. These priests revealed the story of a mighty island nation, larger than Libya and Asia combined, situated beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the great Atlantic Ocean. Plato's account, through the voice of his character Critias, describes Atlantis in breathtaking detail. It was a marvel of engineering, a utopia of immense wealth and power. The city itself was a series of concentric rings of land and water, created by the god Poseidon. He had fallen in love with a mortal woman there, Cleito, and built the city to protect her. The land was rich, fertile, and abundant with every kind of animal, including elephants. The soil produced 2 harvests a year, and the islanders were completely self-sufficient. In the center of the city stood a magnificent acropolis. Here, a temple dedicated to Poseidon and Cleito gleamed, covered in silver with pinnacles of gold. Inside, a massive gold statue of Poseidon himself, driving a chariot pulled by 6 winged horses, touched the roof. It was a testament to their devotion and their staggering wealth. The kings of Atlantis, descended from Poseidon's 10 sons, ruled with wisdom and virtue. For generations, they despised everything but virtue, caring little for their gold. They built great bridges connecting the land rings, and a massive canal that linked the city directly to the sea. Their harbors were filled with trade ships and a formidable navy. The Atlanteans were not just wealthy, they were technologically advanced. They possessed knowledge of engineering and metallurgy that sounded like a dream. Plato describes metals we no longer recognize, like the red flashing orichalcum, which was mined on the island and considered second only to gold in value. For many generations, this divine nature held sway. They lived in peace and prosperity, masters of their domain, a beacon of civilization in the ancient world. But, as the story goes, this golden age could not last. The divine portion of their souls became diluted over time, mixed too often with mortal blood. Human nature began to take over, their virtue faded, replaced by unseemly greed and power. They became corrupt, arrogant, and avaricious. They were no longer the benevolent rulers of old, they were conquerors. They set their sights on the rest of the world, on Athens and on all of Europe and Asia. The Atlantean Empire, now a tyrannical force, raised a vast army and navy. They sought to enslave the known world, believing their power was absolute and their destiny manifest. But one small state stood against them: prehistoric Athens. Plato describes these ancient Athenians as the embodiment of civic virtue, the perfect counter to Atlantean corruption. A great war was fought, and the Athenians, despite being abandoned by their allies, fought bravely against the overwhelming force of the Atlantean Empire. And then, just as the battle reached its peak, the gods intervened. Zeus, king of the gods, saw the grievous state of the once noble race and decided to pass judgment. In a single violent day and night, the world was shaken. There occurred violent earthquakes and floods, Plato wrote. The judgment was swift, and it was total. The brave Athenian army was swallowed by the earth, and the island of Atlantis, the magnificent city, the source of all this power and hubris, disappeared into the depths of the sea. The Atlantic Ocean, where the island once stood, became an impassable barrier of mud for a time, a graveyard of a vanished civilization, a warning to all of humanity. And there, Plato's story ends. The Critias dialogue cuts off, unfinished. He left the world with the most tantalizing, frustrating cliffhanger in human history. For centuries after Plato, the story was largely forgotten or dismissed. His own student, Aristotle, famously quipped that he who invented it also destroyed it. Aristotle and most classical scholars believed Atlantis was a noble lie, a philosophical fable, a thought experiment created by Plato to illustrate his ideas about the perfect state. Plato used it as a morality tale. The story of virtuous, idealized Athens versus the corrupt, wealthy, and technologically advanced Atlantis was a warning about imperial overreach. It was a lesson on what happens when a society loses its moral compass, when it values material wealth and military power over wisdom and virtue. The fall was inevitable. But the human mind does not like to let go of such a powerful story. As the Roman Empire fell and the Dark Ages began, the story of Atlantis lay dormant, waiting to be rediscovered. It wasn't until the Renaissance, with the rediscovery of Plato's texts, that the legend was reborn. Scholars and dreamers once again began to ask, what if it was real? The age of exploration added fuel to the fire. As sailors charted new continents and discovered lost civilizations like the Aztec and Inca, anything seemed possible. Suddenly, the idea of a great drowned continent in the Atlantic didn't seem so far-fetched. Maybe this Atlantis was the common ancestor, the mother culture? This idea was truly set ablaze in 1882 by a man named Ignatius Donnelly, a former U.S. congressman and amateur scholar. He would become the father of modern Atlantis theory. His book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, was a global sensation. It meticulously argued that Plato's story was not myth, but literal, factual history. Donnelly proposed that Atlantis was the true Garden of Eden, the source of all human civilization. He claimed it was the origin of everything. He argued that the gods of ancient Greece, Egypt, and Scandinavia were not gods at all, but the kings and queens of Atlantis, remembered in myth. He drew parallels between pyramids in Egypt and pyramids in Mesoamerica, separated by an ocean. How could this be, he asked, unless they shared a common lost ancestor? Donnelly connected flood myths from around the world, from Noah's Ark to the Epic of Gilgamesh, and proposed they were all distant, fractured memories of the sinking of Atlantis. His book was incredibly persuasive, weaving together mythology, geology, and linguistics into a grand, unified theory of human history with Atlantis at its center. Donnelly's work opened the floodgates. The search for Atlantis was no longer a fringe idea, it was a popular obsession. And the first question was, where is it? The most obvious place to look was where Plato said it was, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. This meant somewhere in the vast, unexplored Atlantic Ocean. The Azores Islands, a volcanic archipelago, became a prime candidate. They were perhaps the mountaintops of the sunken continent, all that remained. Others pointed to the Canary Islands, or Madeira. These volcanic islands fit the description of a land in the Atlantic that could have suffered a terrible, fiery end. But the sheer depth of the Atlantic Ocean floor was a problem. Modern oceanography and plate tectonics have shown no evidence of a large, sunken continent there. This, however, hasn't stopped the search. One of the most enduring and controversial clues is the so-called Bimini Road in the Bahamas, discovered in 1968. It's an underwater formation of large, rectangular limestone blocks, fitting together in a long, straight line. To many, it looks unmistakably man-made. It's often linked to the sleeping prophet, Edgar Cayce. Decades earlier, Cayce had predicted that parts of Atlantis would rise near Bimini around 1968 or 1969. This synchronicity was too much for many to ignore. The Bimini Road became a holy site for New Age believers, proof that Cayce's visions were real. Geologists, however, have a more mundane explanation. They insist the road is a natural formation, a type of beach rock that fractures in perfect geometric patterns. Today, the Bimini Road is largely considered a natural geological formation. But for believers, it remains a tantalizing what if, a breadcrumb left by a lost world. When the Atlantic proved empty, searchers turned their gaze elsewhere. They began to question Plato's text. What if beyond the Pillars of Hercules was a mistranslation? What if the numbers were wrong? Plato describes Atlantis sinking 9,000 years before Solon's time. This would place its destruction around 9600 BC. This date is astonishing. It's the very end of the last ice age. Human civilization, as we know it, with cities, writing, and metallurgy, was not supposed to exist. But what if Plato, or Solon, or the Egyptian priests made a mistake? What if 9,000 years was really 900? This simple change shifts everything. If the date was 900 years before Solon, around 1500 BC, it lands us squarely in the Bronze Age. And in the Bronze Age, there was a great civilization that vanished. This leads us to the most popular and most scientifically plausible location theory, the island of Thera, known today as the beautiful Greek island of Santorini. Around 1600 BC, Thera was home to the Minoan civilization. They were a sophisticated, peaceful, seafaring people with advanced art, plumbing, and a powerful navy. But Thera was also a massive volcano, and around that time it erupted in one of the most violent explosions in human history, an event of truly apocalyptic scale. The eruption, thousands of times more powerful than a nuclear bomb, vaporized the center of the island. It sent a black cloud of ash across the entire region. It also triggered colossal tsunamis hundreds of feet high that smashed into the coast of nearby Crete, the heart of the Minoan civilization. In a single day, the Minoan world was shattered. Their navy was destroyed, their ports ruined, their crops poisoned by ash. Their civilization collapsed and never recovered. The parallels are stunning. A powerful island civilization, master of the sea. A capital city, Akrotiri, buried in ash. And a catastrophic end by water and fire. Could this be it? Could the Minoan eruption be the seed of the Atlantis legend? A real-life catastrophe, passed down through oral tradition for 1,000 years, the story would have been distorted, exaggerated. 900 years became 9,000. The island of Thera became the continent of Atlantis. The Minoans became the godlike Atlanteans. This Minoan hypothesis is elegant. It grounds Plato's story in a real, documented geological event. It's the theory most historians and archaeologists will point to. But it has problems. Thera is in the Aegean, inside the Pillars of Hercules, not outside. And it's much, much smaller than the continent Plato described. For true believers, the Minoan theory is a compromise, a safe explanation that lacks the grandeur of the original myth. They continue to search for a truer fit. Some have looked to other locations in the Mediterranean, places like Malta, with its mysterious ancient temples, or Sardinia, with its thousands of Nuraga stone towers. But Plato was specific, the Atlantic. This has led some researchers to truly surprising locations, far from the Greek world, driven by new interpretations of the text. One theory points to the coast of Spain, near the modern Doñana National Park. Texts describe a lost city, Tartessos, that vanished mysteriously, buried in mud. Researchers using satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar have found evidence of what they believe are memorial cities, built by survivors in the image of a lost, drowned capital. A controversial theory points to Antarctica. Charles Hapgood argued the crust shifted 12,000 years ago, moving it to the South Pole and flash freezing a civilization that lived there. This theory, while intriguing, is rejected by virtually all geologists, but it captures the imagination, suggesting a pristine, complete civilization is waiting to be found under the ice. And what about South America? Some have pointed to the high plains of Bolivia. The layout of ruins near Lake Pupo, they argue, matches Plato's description of the Atlantean capital. But perhaps the most visually compelling and most recent location theory is the Richat Structure, better known as the Eye of the Sahara in Mauritania. Its discovery from space was a revelation. It is a massive, circular geological feature, a series of perfect concentric rings, exactly as Plato described. The measurements are a stunningly close match to the dimensions Plato gave for the capital city. It is located, as Plato said, south of the Pillars of Hercules. Geologists insist it is a natural, domed uplift that has eroded over time. But could this natural feature have been the location for the city? Advocates of this theory point to surrounding evidence of ancient rivers, a time when the Sahara was green. They argue it was once connected to the Atlantic by a great waterway. It is a hypnotic, captivating idea that the ruins of Atlantis are not at the bottom of the ocean, but sitting in plain sight, mistaken for a mountain range. So where does this leave us? We have a story from one philosopher. We have dozens of theories, each passionate and problematic. But what do we have in terms of proof? The hard, cold truth is this. There is not one single undisputed physical artifact from Atlantis. Not one coin, not one tablet, not one piece of orichalcum. No ancient map, outside of those based on Plato, has ever shown a continent in the Atlantic. No other ancient writer before Plato ever mentions it. The linguistic and genetic evidence is also missing. If Atlantis was the mother culture, we would expect to see a single Atlantean root language or DNA marker. We do not. The 90-2600 BC date is a problem. This was the Mesolithic, a time of hunter-gatherers, not metropolises. It contradicts 150 years of established archaeological history. To believe in Atlantis requires us to believe in a great amnesia, that a global advanced civilization existed, but that all memory of it was wiped out, save for one story passed to Plato. For scholars, the case is closed. Atlantis is a myth, a brilliant, enduring, and important myth, but a myth nonetheless. It is Plato's republic made into a narrative. It is a story about the cycle of civilizations, how they rise through virtue and fall through arrogance, a warning to Plato's own Athens about the dangers of imperial hubris. But the legend is now far more powerful than Plato's original intent. It has taken on a life of its own, evolving with each new generation. In the 19th century, it was an answer to questions of human origin. In the 20th century, it was a New Age paradise, a source of spiritual wisdom and crystal energy. Atlantis has become a vessel for our own hopes and fears. We project onto it our dreams of a lost utopia, a time when humans lived in harmony with nature and possessed great wisdom. We also project our anxieties, our fear of cataclysm, of natural disaster, of our own technology running amok and leading to our destruction. Atlantis is our origin and our ending. The story resonates because it feels true. We see societies rise and fall. We see wealth corrupt, and we know deep down that our own civilization is fragile. It is the ultimate mystery, a mirror reflecting our hopes for a golden past and our fears of an apocalyptic end. The search for Atlantis is, in the end, the search for ourselves. If this mystery captivated you, hype this video. Share it with others who love lost legends. Like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the great unknowns of history.